In this lesson, we're going to look at creating grouped frequency distributions and relative frequency distributions using Excel. I have another video where I show how to create a grouped frequency distribution and a cumulative frequency distribution in Google. It turns out that the steps in Excel and Google are very similar. So if you are a Google user and you need to learn how to do this, go check out my videos first on Google, and then you can get some practice using the tools in Google to try to recreate this while watching my video in Excel. Before we get started, there is a tool pack that we need, either for Google or Excel. I have videos out there showing you how to install this tool pack in both of the spreadsheet apps. In Excel, you can find the data analysis tool pack. If you click on the data menu, data analysis tool pack is over here on the far right side. We can click on that and it'll bring up a pop-up menu to give us a lot of different options that we will be looking at throughout the semester. These same options exist identically inside Google. They just don't come up as a pop-up menu in the middle. It's a pop-up menu on the right side. It's exactly the same stuff though. So before I get started with the data analysis tool pack though, I'm going to cancel because I need to get out of it. I have to do a little bit of work beforehand. So the data here represented is that of our ages of US presidents at the time of their first inauguration. So as we mentioned before, this is in order from the first president, George Washington, going down and then to the next column, all the way to President Obama, President Trump, President Biden. So we have all of the ages of first inaugurations. There is one president in here that was inaugurated twice and was not a direct re-election, like right after. He didn't serve 2 terms back to back, and that's Grover Cleveland. He's only represented in here once. We're only looking at one person, one age, first inauguration, which is why there are only 45 values in our table instead of 46, since President Biden is considered our 46th president. Okay, so let's set up what we did by hand previously with our grouped frequency distribution. In order to create a grouped frequency distribution for Google or Excel, the spreadsheet needs to know what our upper class limits are. So we're going to start there. Upper class limits. And let's put them in. We had 49, 57, 65, 73, and 81. We can pretend like we have not created the table by hand, but we do need to establish our limits. So we're doing that first step for creating the frequency distribution. We have to determine how many classes and what our class width is, and then create the classes. We're going to let the technology tally the data values for us. So we won't have to sit and sift through the data and possibly make mistakes along the way as well as we tally these results. So again, letting technology do the hard work for us. Once I have my upper class limits in, now I can go back to the data analysis option. And in this analysis tools, we're looking for the histogram. For some reason, Google and Excel call the frequency distribution the histogram, primarily because the histogram is the graphical representation of our frequency distribution. So we are not going to select the chart output at the very bottom of this menu. We're going to leave that blank. Honestly, because I don't think it makes that good of a chart. I think we can clean up our table first and make a better chart that's easier to look at. And also, it's easier to clean up a table than it is to try to clean up a graph in the technology. Cleaning up graphs, editing graphs, it can be a little difficult at times. There are a lot of menu items. So, we're going to start out. Our input range is the data. In order to get the information into this pop-up window tool, we are going to click on this arrow and it minimizes our window so that we can go to our spreadsheet and select our data. If you're working in Google, this is a little bit different. The idea is the same. We're still putting in our input, but if you haven't yet, go watch my Google video on how to do this so that you know how to interact with the Google tool pack in order to do the relative frequency distribution, etc. So here we have our data, and if I click that down arrow, so the up arrow minimizes it, and then to get back to it, I click this little down arrow over here on the right. The bin range, this is our upper class limits. So I'm going to select just the limits, not my label, and you see them indicated there, A8 to A12. I'm not going to click on labels. I'm going to leave that blank. My output range, I'm going to put the table inside this same spreadsheet instead of creating it in a new spreadsheet or a new worksheet or new workbook. So new worksheet would create a new sheet. New workbook would actually go put it in a new file. I don't want either of those. Let's just put it here underneath the data. I'm going to select cell D7 looks good. When I select this cell, the spreadsheet app will create the table to the right and down of that cell. So I want to make sure that I have nothing to the right and nothing below the cell that I pick for the output range. And I'll click that down arrow again to get my menu. And when I click OK, it's going to give me my grouped frequency distribution that I'm going to have to clean up. And there we have it. Our group frequency distribution, 9, 23, 9, 3, 1. Those are the same values that we got when we did it by hand, which is awesome. So it counts the data values for us and puts them in the correct bins. It wants the upper bins because it's counting everything below or equal to that number. So what I'm going to do here first, I'm going to rename this word bin. This isn't a bin. This is referring to ages. So I'm going to put ages there. We can keep frequency. That's fine. We can give it a title, so I'm going to insert and go down so I have a little bit more room. We have ages of U.S. presidents at inauguration. I can merge this. I'm going to go to the home menu, click merge and center. I was trying to figure out how I can make it a little bit wider, and it doesn't look like I'm going to do it easily, so we'll do it the hard way. Merged cells don't act the same way that regular cells do. Double clicking and it snaps to the size. It doesn't work that way for a merged cell, but that's okay. Notice this more down here. Google and Excel both do this. This is for open-ended grouped frequency distributions where we have something like greater than that we could deal with, greater than 81. Since we don't have anything here, we can delete this. We don't need that information in our table. And then the other thing that we need to do to clean up our grouped frequency distribution is to add in our lower limits to these classes. So I'm going to click in here. I double clicked to get the cursor to happen. 42 to 49, 50 to 57, and I'm just adding in the lower class limit with a dash for each one of these. If I want them to be centered, we can center them. Preference ultimately on how you want to present the data. This is our grouped frequency distribution in Excel. One thing that I do want that I'm going to need for my relative frequency distribution, I need to know how many data values I have. I already know there are 45 because we talked about that before, but let's add these values up. So equals sum, I'm putting this away from the table because it doesn't have to be part of the table, and I get 45. Let's talk about creating our relative frequency distribution. Remember that to create any other supplemental distribution, we have to first create our grouped frequency distribution. So if we wanted the cumulative frequency, the relative frequency, or the relative cumulative frequency, we have to create the grouped frequency distribution first. So here we have the group frequency distribution. Now I'm going to create that relative frequency distribution. I'm going to start by copying my table, and I'm going to change the color just to be different. We're going to change this word frequency to relative frequency. And in order to get the relative frequency, we're going to do exactly what we did before, which is take that value that we have here and divide by our total. So we can do one of two things. We can leave that value there and just say equals 9 divided by 45. So I'm going to click on that 45 and hit enter. and it gives me that decimal answer. But I want to really use the power of the spreadsheet. And one of the powers of the spreadsheet is the ability to create a formula and then copy that formula in other places, and that formula automatically adjusts based on how we moved our cursor to copy it. So here's what I mean by that. I'm actually going to delete all of these values in the relative frequency distribution. I just want to use my previous grouped frequency distribution table above. Okay, so I'm going to start out equals. I'm going to come up here and click on my 9. Notice the cell reference here, E9, divided by, and I'll click on the 45, E15. I hit enter and I get my percentage. I get my decimal right now, which we're going to reformat to be a percentage in a moment. Now, I'm going to do something purposefully wrong so that you can see what it is and you can hopefully be aware of it if it happens to you and know what you need to do to adjust it. So if I come here in Google, notice I have this big white plus sign in my cursor. This is one of the many different faces of a cursor that happens in these spreadsheet apps. Google has its own set. It's a little bit different, but where that cursor is inside the program, the cursor has different powers. So right now the cursor's power is really only selecting. So it'll select and that's pretty much it. But if I move the cursor down, you see how the cursor changes to a cursor arrow plus this like XY axis almost, the plus sign with arrows everywhere. Yep, this is a moving cursor. So if I click on this and I drag, it will actually move my cell around. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to keep my 0.2 up there and change my cell back to blue. What I want to do is copy my formulas in the cell. So I'm going to come down here and my cursor is going to change again to be this like solid black plus. That little tiny square in the bottom right corner of the cell, that's my cell handle. When my cursor turns into the plus, it can grab the handle. And when it grabs the handle, and now that I drag it, you see the green outlines that are occurring? When I drag my cell, what it will do is copy the formula that's inside that cell, but it doesn't just copy and paste. It copies and adjusts. So I'm just going to do one because like I said, I'm doing this and it's wrong and I want you to be able to see why it's wrong first. So if I click it, oh no, I'm dividing by 0. I shouldn't be though. I should be dividing by 45. So let's click inside the cell and see what happens. Remember up here, this first one was E9, which is the number 9, divided by E15, which has 45 in it. But when I dragged and I copied that formula, it adjusts the formula to the next ones down. So instead of 9, it's selecting 23. Instead of 45, it's on an empty cell. It thinks it's dividing by 0. We don't want it to, so we need to figure out how to correct it. I'm going to come back up here to the 0.2 and click inside it. Here's where I'm going to use something called locked cell references. So right now we're using cell references to create a formula. That's what these things are called. E9, E15. We are referencing a cell to create a formula. I want E15 for every single one of these cells. I don't want that to change at all. So I'm going to come up here inside my formula bar and I'm going to put dollar signs around the E. So I have $E, $15. The dollar signs in front of the E and in front of the 15 lock the column and the row. So it's telling Excel and Google, because Google does the exact same thing when you put dollar signs in the cell reference like this, it will lock the cell. It's telling Excel and Google, use this cell every single time, don't move away from it. So now, notice I still have 0.2, that's exactly what I should have. Now when I come up here into the cell with 0.2 in it and I click on my handle and I drag it, I get the values that I'm expecting. And if I click inside, E10 divided by E15, E11 divided by E15, every single one of these is still being divided by E15. So the reference in my group frequency distribution changes, but the total doesn't. And that's pretty cool. Okay, the last thing we need to do for our relative frequency distribution is I'm going to select these decimal numbers and come up here to the percent style. So percent style is a shortcut on the home menu that allows me to format quickly into percents. So it automatically takes a decimal number and turns it into a percent, and these are the exact same percents that we had before. We can do a sum here as well and see that it does indeed equal 100%, which is pretty awesome. Next up in this series is how to take these two tables and create the related graphs from them.